All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College, and as I have been doing, I'm going to be doing another one of these presentations for the 152-161 ASP.NET class. And again, I'm not going to go into any depth and breadth of coverage in here after today because I did these a little bit off cycle. What will be left after today will be chapters 14 and 15. Chapter 14 is on, it's a database chapter. Those are the last two that we have. Link and the ADO.NET framework. And chapter 15 is on working with data advanced topics. I hope to either get those two lectures done this weekend or Monday and Tuesday of next week. But regardless, my hope is that by Tuesday, the 15th, I believe, all lectures will be up for the entire semester. So let's go on. Chapter 17, personalizing websites. As you can see here, details about the profile feature that ships with ASP.NET. So in other words, this is something that you get as a, quote, freebie, unquote, with ASP.NET. Learn how to create and consume a user's profile in a website. Learn how you can recognize users and how to serve them customized content, and how to access the profile of other users on your site. Now, what they talk about in here is the fact that for a website to be successful, the more personalized it can be, the better. And they give examples in here, such as, let's suppose, for example, I follow the Wisconsin sports teams. So let's suppose that they personalized a website for me, and I would have maybe Wisconsin Badger football or basketball, depending on the season, Green Bay Packer football, Milwaukee Brewer baseball, Milwaukee Buck basketball, Marquette basketball, etc. That kind of stuff. All right, that's starting to personalize. They give an example in here of maybe you wanted your own news categories. Maybe you're really into the stock market and you want, all this business news type of an idea. All right, or maybe you're just into a certain programming language and you want to get all updates on features from that programming language. But the author mentions there that personalization goes farther than this. You can keep track of different kinds of user details, such as a name or a date of birth. Now, that might not seem like a big thing, but if you go out to a site on your birthday, for example, you might get a special email from the site saying that, any purchase that you make today, you get 10% off because it's your birthday, type of an idea. All right? So they will do this in the scope of personalizing this Planet Rocks website in here. And as mentioned, ASP.NET 4.5 ships with a service called Profile. And with this, you can store data for a user with very little code. Basically, it's setting some stuff up in your web.config file and then checking it in code typically. All right, as mentioned, it's another application service that ships with ASP.NET, allows you to store and retrieve information about users. What kind of information? Literally, it's limitless. So you could put in there anything about users that you wanted to. All right, as mentioned on the bottom here of page 630, that enabling this is a two-step process. All right, it says first, you have to define the information you want to store in your web.config file. All right. Based on that, ASP.NET Runtime will generate and compile a class for you on the fly with that information in it. It also dynamically expands a property called Profile so that you can use these particular settings. Then in the application, as it says, you program directly to this generated class to get and store. So it's like a setter-getter type of thing for the current user. By default, it's connected to the logged-in user. Now, at the end of the chapter, they'll talk about a little bit about doing this for unauthenticated users, so having an anonymous profile. You can do that, but the idea would be if somebody signs in anonymously and you're collecting information from them, sooner or later you'd want to grab that information and have them register and then be able to copy that information from an anonymous profile over to just a regular profile, a logged-in profile, or an authenticated profile. All right. It says here this works only within website projects and not within web app projects. So this will work in all the stuff we've been basically doing this semester, but not the C# stuff when we worked on projects last semester. All right. So first, configuring your profile. As mentioned, you define a profile for the website in web.config. You do that by specifying a profile element, something like what you see right here. All right. There's two types of properties that exist. Most of the ones they talk about in this chapter are simple properties. When you have simple properties, there are things like strings or ints, etc., maybe a Boolean. But with a complex property, that's when you combine simple properties together into more or less a data structure. So, as mentioned here, you define simple properties as direct children of the properties element using an add element. So in this example that you see right here, they've held a user's first name and they've held their birth date. And you go, wait a minute, it says first name and birth date. Yeah, but those are things that you would fill in. You'll see this later. All right? Both of these properties are strings. I'm sorry, this property here is a string by default, so you don't have to put in the type because that's the default type. Notice with birth date, though, you do have to put in the type because it's not a default property. All right? So it says here, you need to define the type explicitly using the type attribute for all the non-strings and its fully qualified name, okay, including its namespace, which is what you see right there, system.datetime. So here's some examples of things that you might want to use. Name, type we've already talked about. The allow anonymous, are you going to allow a user to come in there anonymously? In other words, without being authenticated. Depending on the site, you might want to do that. And what many sites do is they allow you to put in information, but then when you want to maybe check out, if you're going to buy something or whatever, if you want to do some kind of an operation like that, then you have to log in. Do you want default values? Do you want things to be read-only, or can they be changed at runtime? All right. Again, because besides simple properties, you can create what are called property groups. This is a good example here. So what we've done for this postal address is this is basically one property now. That it's got the address, the street address, the city, the state, and the zip code, etc., in the country. All right. So as it says, to create a profile group, you add a group element, and then the group element has the add elements inside of it. Okay. As mentioned on the top of 633, you can have multiple groups within property tags, but you can have only one level of group. So you can't have a group within a group or a group within an add. All right. You can also use your own types that you define in the app code folder, and they give you an example here of what you might want to do, like favorite color, for example. And again, this is the kind of thing that you very well might want to use on a website. All right. It says a situation where you need a different syntax to refer to a type is when you're using generics. And generic is basically you're storing things that are more or less, they are user defined. So in other words, if you look right here, what do we have? Well, we're saying that we've got a list of strings, and those are going to be roles. And we want to be able to add those. Okay? So in order to be able to give the profile a property that's generic, you need some special syntax. And they mention that how you have to set it up too inside of your web.config file here on the top of page 634. And as it says, the first part of it looks kind of like what we've been doing. All right. And then you get into this list class. And as it says, it's in the systems.collections.generic namespace. That's why you need all this stuff in there. All right. Then you see the tilde L or backtick L. It says it's not a typo, but the .NET way to refer to generic types in a plain text type of format. All right. So you'd end up putting it in here, and this is what they do in the chapter for your favorite genres. They set it up like this. So the first thing that they do in here is they talk about how to create a profile. All right, this is down on the bottom of page 634, on the bottom part of 634. It goes on to 635, 636, and 637. So it says we see how to create a profile that's capable of storing a user's first name, their last name, their date of birth, a short biography, and a list of IDs with their favorite genres. Later, what we want to be able to do is to only show genres that they've shown an interest in. So in other words, if they've shown an interest in rock, but they've shown no interest in grunge, why show them grunge reviews? All right, so they will be able to very, very much customize what is shown in their genre page. All right, so you'll notice in here, inside of the properties, first name, last name, date of birth, a bio, and favorite genres. The first name and last name, simple strings. The date of birth, a date, time. The bio, again, a simple string. And the name, what we just looked at in there, a generic. So we save the web.config after we've made our changes. It says as soon as you save the file, a background process will begin to generate a class file that will be used for the profile. After it's been generated, you can access it programmatically through the profile property of the page. So you put in profile dot, and then all the stuff that we just added should be in there. You see first name, you'll see other things, date of birth, etc. Some of these other stuff are methods basically that you're able to use automatically with the properties. So it says to test the profile, open this up, double click the page, and start putting in information. And what you should notice on here, I guess that's the vb.net one, on here is when you put in the profile dot, you put in an F, it should immediately pick up the first name in the IntelliSense. All right, when you're finished typing the code, it says save and close because that's all we're doing with this one. Switch back to the web.config file. Scroll all the way down to the bottom here on step 7. Create a copy of the location element that blocks access to the management folder and paste it right below an existing element. What they're saying is right now, the way this is set up for management, right now, we have been starting to put some security in here, but basically anyone can go in and do things. So what we want to do, for example, anyone is going to, I believe right now still anyone can go in and add reviews. Only logged in users should be able to go in and add their own reviews, and only either administrators or logged in users should be able to remove their own reviews. So if I've written a review for something and I want to remove it, I should be able to, or an administrator should be able to, because maybe I put something questionable in there as far as content. But if I put something in there, if I put a review in there and another user comes in, they shouldn't be, if they're not a supervisor, if they're not an administrator, they should not be able to go in and remove or modify my review. All right, it says in the Solution Explorer, right-click the myprofile.aspx and choose View in Browser. It says you can only view this file if you're logged in. If you weren't logged in previously, it should take you to the login page. So log in and you'll come back to it. And it says to see this profile, all right, close your browser and go back into Visual Studio, open the Server Explorer, expand the tables element, locate the profiles table, right-click it, and that's what we should have just put in. So it shows the profile data for a user, the first name and the last name that they entered. Notice it says you should not modify this data manually. Rather, you should use profile, what they've done here, to actually make changes, if indeed changes have to be made. So, bottom of the page here on 636, when you define profile properties in web.config, the ASP.NET runtime creates a class for you in the background called profile comment that gives you access to these properties that we created. You saw that to define the properties, we use the add element, and we save this inside of our web.config file. Then we were able to use it in code. Notice changes you make to your profile are saved automatically for you during end request, which is an event that fires late in the page cycle. That way you can change the profile when you need to throughout the process, and hopefully the latest and greatest will be saved. So as far as using the profile on the bottom of 637, it says writing to a profile is easy. To change a property, all you need is a single line of code. The profile keeps track of the changes you've made, and it automatically saves, again, towards the end of the process. Reading from a profile is just as easy. So in this example right here, we're grabbing what was in the profile and we're filling up a text box with it. Retrieving is just as easy. So what you'll notice is, again, it says to access the street property. So this is part of the thing that was in the group. It was the name of that property, dot, whatever. So profile dot postal address dot. So this is the name of the element dot, the name of the sub-element. Now notice accessing the favorite genre is slightly different. Because this property is a collection, you don't assign to it directly. Rather, you use its methods and properties. All right, so it says the following clears the entire list, so that's the clear, and it adds 2 genres, genre 7 and genre 11. So in the next exercise that starts on the bottom of 638, and it goes to 639, 640, 641, and 642, they show you how to store some of this basic data in the user profile. What you do is you end up coming in here and creating this. So the idea is you're creating a profile right here. And that profile will be associated with that user. So when that user logs in, all right, notice there's a biography right there. Depending on how granular you want to get with this. One thing I was thinking about yesterday is suppose that you've got a website, and for that website, for whatever reason, you want to make it some kind of an astrological website. So maybe for date of birth, maybe I want to bring up all sorts of stuff about, I'm a Scorpio. So about Scorpios, type of thing. If you're a Libra, about Libras, etc. For the biography, again, depending on how granular you want to get with this stuff, you might end up coming in here and you might pick out words that they put in their biography. So if it says that you're interested in guitar, then maybe if you knew that at one of these concerts, one of the people doing it did a guitar solo or it was unbelievable, you might end up adding that kind of stuff. So as it says, in the last column of each of the 3 rows, drag a required field validator in there because they will have to be filled in. Set the properties as follows for first name, for last name, and date of birth. They don't have to give a biography, it looks like. Also for date of birth, they're making sure that it's a date. Now you could put other checks in here too. All they're doing is making sure it's a valid date. So if I put a date in the future, it's probably going to take it. So I could say that it had to be, between a couple dates or whatever if I wanted to use a compare validator as well. All right. So there's your profile. So when you first create an account, they'll probably ask you to come in and create a profile. And you'll notice the date of birth is required. If for some reason you didn't want to give your date of birth, you could always put a bogus one in there and the system would really never know. And the biography is not required. And again, first name and last name are. So then they tell you to come in and add this code. So what are we doing? All right. In this case, we're grabbing everything that we put into the text boxes and we're using that to copy it right into our profile so we don't have to add it manually. All right. So in the page load event, then we're going the other way. So once you've done it, it's copying information from the profile and it's copying it back into those text boxes. All right. So they mentioned starting on the bottom of page 641 here, the author says much of what you've seen in this exercise should be familiar by now. The page has a number of text box controls that we validate using either the required field validator and or the compare validator. The labels are hooked up to their text box controls using the associated control ID property. That's like the for that you have basically inside of HTML. When you click the Save Profile button, the values are retrieved from the text box controls and stored in your profile. All right. And it says to avoid overwriting the data the user has entered, the code gets the data from the profile only when the page initially loads and not during postback. All right. And they mentioned something pretty good in here. It says, although this example seems fairly trivial, it lays out a foundation for what you could do in a more advanced scenario. All right, if you have different things you want to do. So in here, what we're going to do is we want to store a list of integers to store the user's preferences for certain musical genres. Now, they're not going to have to remember those numbers. We're going to give them a checkbox list, and in that checkbox list, they can highlight basically any genre they're interested in highlighting. And the system will figure out the numbers that are associated with it. So that's what happens in the next try it out exercise that's on 642, 643, 644, 645 to the top of 646. So as the author says, you learn how to fill out the favorite genres property of the user profile. To let them choose their favorite genres, we add a checkbox list that displays the available list of genres. When the user saves the data, the items checked are then stored in the profile. Now, I'm not going to go over any of the code, but I will show you what they show you in here for the picture. This is a way of doing it, all right? There is absolutely nothing wrong with what they have. One thing I would probably think of is maybe going at least 2 wide, maybe 3 wide, because maybe over time we're going to add a lot of genres. We don't want that to run off the page. But if we go 2 or 3 wide here, you know, that's going to double or triple the space that we have, which is already limited. All right. So the author mentions down on the bottom of page 645, says earlier you defined the favorite genres property as being a generic list that can hold integer values. As the property is a list, we don't assign values to it directly. Instead, we use methods like add if we do check one, or clear if we uncheck to either add or remove items. So here, alternative list would generate an add, and let's say we didn't want it anymore for alternative rock. If we checked it again and it was removed, it would do a clear on that. And that's what the author is showing here. Then when the list is empty, the IDs of the selected genres are added, all right? And we loop through and look for all the ones that have been checked. So, as mentioned here, starting on 646 and going on to 647, 648, 649, and 650, the author says the list of favorite genres really isn't useful until you actually make use of the site. So in this next exercise, we see how to use the list to limit the list of reviews that users initially see when they visit the page review. So we're going to be going in and looking to see which ones they've checked. So currently the site has 2 pages in the reviews folder that are capable of displaying reviews. All by genre, which displays everyone of a certain genre, and all. So it says to try this out, we'll modify the default.aspx page so that it displays yet another list of reviews. But this time that list will be limited to those belonging to genres the user has selected in this checkbox on their profile page. And when an anonymous user sees the page, they get a message that they haven't set up any genres yet because, indeed, they are anonymous. All right, so this person looks like has checked 3 things. It was the ones that we saw before. I think alternative rock, grunge, and indie rock were what we saw. Alternative rock, grunge, and indie rock. That's what we saw back on page 645. That's why you get this. And again, if you're an anonymous user, you get this. Sorry, no reviews were found. You either didn't set them or you need to log in first. Notice you can also come in here, as it says, and change your genre preferences. All right, maybe there was some kind of a group that you, a genre that you selected accidentally, or you've changed your mind over time. All right, so the code and the code behind executes a link line item query to entities query that retrieves all of the reviews that belong to the user's favorite genre. For anonymous users, as it says, it will be empty, so we check the count first. And if it's empty, there's no sense in going on and executing the code if there's nothing to execute. And so that's what the author shows here. This is the link You notice it looks similar. Let's grab the one here, the C# one. It looks similar to SQL, but sort of kind of on its head or stood up on its side. You do the from, then the order by, then the where, then the select. All right. This is Microsoft's own invention. All right. The next exercise, I'm not going to go over it all because it talks about managing a photo album, and that's on 650 all the way through 654. So I'm just going to skip that one because I haven't covered any of that, all right, throughout the class. So the last thing that's discussed in here, about the last 6 or 7 pages, talks about other ways of dealing with a profile. The first, as it says, what about people who are anonymous? They haven't signed up for an account or they haven't logged in. It says for those users, you need to enable anonymous identification. When you have that, ASP.NET, as you can see here, creates an anonymous user in the users table for every new visitor to the site. That user gets a cookie linked to the anonymous user account. On every visit, the browser sends the cookie with the request. To enable that, it says you need to do 2 things. Turn on anonymous identification, and you turn that on inside of your web.config file, and modify some or all of the properties to expose them to modified users. All right, so we have it here. In our add, we have to say allow anonymous to be true. All right. Next, starting on the bottom of 655, they talk about cleaning up old anonymous profiles. Well, the idea is what happens when these people who have been put in here anonymously, as time goes on, they do register. So it says you may wonder what happens when an anonymous user's profile, to an anonymous user's profile, when the user actually signs up for an account. The answer is nothing. The old profile is discarded and the user gets a new profile. It says, fortunately, it's easy to fix. When a user changes from anonymous to authenticated, all right, ASP.NET fires the profile on migrate anonymous event that you can handle. And if you do that, you can come in there and you can copy stuff over from the anonymous to the one that they've just created, which would make sense because why make them add that information in all over again? So as it says, when you do this, the code copies over the existing anonymous profile from the old to the new one. It says, note there's no point in copying over properties that are not accessible by anonymous users. Okay? So they wouldn't have been set anyway, in other words. And the final 3 lines that are shown down here, they delete the old profile, they clear the anonymous user ID from the cookie, and finally they delete the old anonymous user. And if you don't do that, it's not necessarily that it's going to be a terrible thing, except that you're going to be wasting space on a server someplace, holding information for an anonymous profile that will never be used by anybody again. So it says the Profile Manager class provides you with useful methods to work with a profile. If you want more on that, you can come over to here, and it'll bring up stuff on managing the profile. There it is, Profile Manager class. Looking at other users' profiles, it says the examples so far allow the user to access for the current user. It says, however, what if you need to display something for a different user? It says, for example, what if you want to display a user's biography below a GigPix album? You won't be able to use the profile of it because you only have information about the current user. So as it says, to solve this problem, the Profile Common class comes with a getProfile method. It said it retrieves an existing profile from the database if the name passed to it exists, or if the brand new profile, or it creates a brand new one if it doesn't exist. All right. Now it says being able to read someone else's profile is extremely useful. All right. It says, however, you can use similar code to update other users' profiles. Well, this is where it's going to be very important, as you'd probably guess, to have a good manager managing this stuff. Because if I go in there and I put stuff into my profile, I'm doing it with the idea that somebody else is not going to be able to come in later and change that. Or they can change my name. All right. So in the last exercise in the chapter on 658, 659, and 660, they again work with the photo album. So I'm not going to go over that one. I'm just going to finish up here by going through these 3 practical personalization tips. Number 1 says, don't try to provide access to the current user on the login page because they have not logged in yet. As it says, the profile is instantiated early in the page's life cycle. Okay, so it says when the login control authenticates the user, it's too late to associate the profile with the current request. Second, carefully consider what to store in a profile as opposed to what to store in a database. Typically, you're not going to want to put any kind of information that's of any kind of personal nature in a profile because, as we've already looked at, depending on the sophistication and depending on how it's being administered, other people can look at that profile information. Third, the current implementation of the profile makes it easy to query data from the profiles table in your own queries. So as it says, show me all people who prefer a rock genre. Again, you might want to think about whether or not you want to do something like that. It doesn't sound like it here, but it can end up becoming a privacy issue. Finally, look at the ASP.NET identity system. There's a lot more in this than what I've gone over. So I've now gone over chapters 1 through 13 and chapters 16 through 19. All right, so the last 2 chapters that I will have to go through are chapters 14 and 15, which I will again do either on the weekend or next week. Thanks.